Hello. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting to see your faces. I'm Eva Clay, and I'm going to talk about hot and holy sex. But I want to start with a question for you all. How's your sex life? Yeah, a mixed response for sure. And why should that matter? Beyond your pleasure, why does your sex life matter? If you haven't noticed already, we are in a very choppy sea of transformation when it comes to sex and love. Kind of everything is changing about the way that we relate. So I'm going to talk to you about some simple tools that I think will forever change the way you look at sex. And look, because this is a really, really big topic, I have narrowed it down to 6 of the most important steps that I think everyone needs to know in order to have a super hot, erotic sex life. But why should you listen to me? Oops. This is actually why you should listen to me. I have been a licensed psychotherapist, a sex therapist, a scholar, and a professor of neuropsychology for over 20 years. But it wasn't until I was approaching the age of 40 and I went through a devastating divorce that I actually had my own sexual awakening. And I needed it. Because here I was, an accomplished couples therapist who was getting a divorce. And I realized that even with all of the science that I knew about sex and relationships, I didn't actually know how to love. And so, because I am an academic at heart, I decided to embark on a kind of field research with myself as the subject. And I started researching, what is it to be sexual in the 21st century? It had been a whole decade since I dated. So, flash forward, I began to study sacred sexuality. I began to study Tantra. I began to study Taoism and polarity and all kinds of energy work. And I'll never forget the day that I walked into a doctor's office just for a routine visit. And you know, when you go in, they have these forms where you have to fill out your emergency contact. And I just stared at that line in total blankness, because where I was so used to writing in my husband's name, I couldn't do that anymore. And I had allowed myself to explore such a wide range of sexuality with so many partners. But what I realized is that my life was full of lovers, but empty of love. And that's when I knew that my field research had taken a wrong turn. So what I'm going to share with you are the results of my findings of my field research on modern sexuality. So what does it take to make sex both hot and holy? We all know that we need to have sex. So how do we infuse that animal sexuality with a sense of the sacred? I want to let you know you don't need to know anything about Tantra in order to do this. You don't need to chant or pray or burn incense or even really do anything spiritual in order to make your sex life holy. But you do need to be familiar with that sexual animal that lives inside of you. Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist, forwarded this idea of the shadow, which means parts of ourself that we deem as evil or unacceptable or inferior, we relegate to the unconscious domain, or our shadow. The erotic shadow are parts of our sexuality that we hide or that we disavow, usually out of shame or guilt. It's really the thing that you want in bed, but you're afraid to ask for. And when we touch a taboo within ourselves, and we allow ourselves to touch that and to express that without shame and guilt, that's when we experience erotic liberation. That's when we become free. Because deep down, we all want to know, am I still okay given this weird, dirty, kinky fantasy and desire that I have? Am I still lovable, even when I'm shut down or in a weird place around my sex? There's one emotion that I want to emphasize to you. And look, here's the deal. I want to teach you what you're not already learning about sex. Anyone can go to a bookstore and read about certain techniques of touch this, do that, lick that, pull that, push that, whatever. we all can learn how to do that. But what I find is sorely lacking in our sexual education is this one thing. And there is one thing that allows you to express your erotic shadow. There is one thing that is going to make your sex life hotter than it's ever been before. Empathy. Both evolutionary psychology and neuroscience teaches us that we are tribal animals. We're built to live in tribal units or clans, and this increases our chance of survival. And if gravity is what holds our solar system in place, empathy is what holds humanity in place. And nature has a grand and poetic agenda to keep us all together, to help us to survive. And nature does this primarily through something called mirror neurons. How many of you here have heard of mirror neurons? Yeah, some of us. It's really cool to understand this. So mirror neurons are specialized brain cells, we all have them, that are designed to mirror, to mimic, and to imitate the brain cells of other people. Mirror neurons basically help us to read minds. Mirror neurons put us into a kind of synchronization with other people. For example, if someone smiles at you and you smile back, someone gets hurt and you wince, because you're vicariously experiencing someone else's experience. And this is why yawns are contagious. And actually, all emotions, for that matter, are contagious because of mirror neurons. But to understand empathy, we have to understand our limbic system. Only mammals have a limbic system. It's this red portion of the brain that you see on the slide. And the limbic system is responsible for our emotions. It's also responsible for what's called our mammalian caregiving system, meaning our instinct to bond. Mammals have this ability to adjust their physiology with the physiology of other mammals. So mammals have this incredible and I think almost magical ability to sense in this kind of fluid and reciprocal exchange with all other mammals. Around the year 2000, 3 psychiatrists forwarded this idea of limbic resonance, meaning that when two humans come together, their limbic systems actually automatically fall into resonance with each other. And it creates a way of emotional attunement, meaning we sense intuitively what someone else is feeling. But the most interesting part about that theory is what we call limbic revision, meaning that with repeated attunement, when two people come together consistently, one mind revises the other. And we know now that we actually have the ability to shift each other's neural structures simply by being emotionally attuned to each other. I have my own experience with limbic revision. When I began my studies of Tantra and sacred sexuality, I just remember so many times going into intimacy workshops and being asked to look into the eyes of a stranger. And at first, I'm an academic, and I was like, are you kidding me? This is really awkward. It feels really awkward to stare into somebody's eyes for more than a moment. And I think that deep down, I was really afraid of somebody seeing my failures and my imperfections. But over time and with practice, it got easier. And in fact, I started to experience a kind of indescribable joy. And I would even say a spiritual bliss from looking into the eyes of another. And what I realized is that even with these failures and these imperfections of mine, that I was still lovable. And this is limbic revision. It taught me how to feel about myself, and it changed my self-perception. Since the dawn of time, since recorded history, humans have been fascinated with this mysterious emotional bond. And it's no surprise that two of the highest grossing movies of our time are all about it. In E.T., the extraterrestrial, the young boy Elliot forms an empathic bond with the alien E.T., so that whatever E.T. feels, Elliot feels. In the 2009 movie Avatar, the Pandoran characters connect to other creatures through their braid, which is actually an extension of their nervous system. And this allows them to exchange thoughts and feelings. We're built this same way. We have a sort of braid of our own, except this braid extends through each of our senses, and it makes sex incredibly hot. During sex, our bodies and our systems get flooded with feel-good neurochemicals. Things like oxytocin, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, all kinds of good things. And all of these chemicals have been proven to have an array of positive health benefits. But science also tells us, if we have sex without an emotional bond, we're only getting a fraction of those feel-good neurochemicals and a fraction of those health benefits. But when I say this, I think about, why do we need science even to tell us this? Because we know when our soul is not fed. During my own explorations, in the beginning, I thought that having more lovers and more experiences would bring me more pleasure. And actually, it didn't. It actually made me feel more alone. And I had a kind of hunger in my belly that just couldn't get filled, no matter how many partners I had. And it was because I didn't know how to empathically attune. And to be honest, most of my partners didn't know how to do it either. So to make myself feel better, I threw myself into my work, and I worked 80+ hours a week. And I figured if I wasn't going to be a mother and have a family and have a deep soul relationship, that at least I would be a rock star in my career. And I know a lot of women who are living this same story today. Ultimately, it ended up just really exhausting me and making me very, very sad. When it comes to empathy, this is one thing I want to emphasize. We are in crisis. If empathy is the single thing that will give you the hottest sex of your life, we are in a global shortage of it. The more time that we spend on our screens, between our cell phones, internet pornography, video gaming, and really any kind of digital usage, the less time that we're spending in empathic resonance. And empathy is like a muscle. The more you use it, the better you get at it. If you don't use it often enough, it gets harder and harder to access. So if you're accustomed to having sex without an empathic bond, without an emotional connection, that muscle is going to become weak. And that becomes a habit with which we use when we have sex. It becomes more of an athletic activity than a deep, soulful, nourishing one. We are in crisis when it comes to empathy. So, most people come to me. Most people come to me looking for tips and tricks on how to be a great lover. And I can teach you all of the great tricks on how to work with each other's body. But again, if you're not an empathic attunement, it's only going to feel half as hot. And it's certainly not going to nourish your soul. So I'm going to give you 6 keys to hot and holy sex. And these are the most important, most pervasively hottest aphrodisiacs that I can teach you. Number 1, eye contact. Mirror neurons activate primarily through eye contact. And in order for mirror neurons to become activated, you have to be face to face and body to body. And when those mirror neurons get activated, that's when we get a hit of oxytocin. And oxytocin is like where it's at. That's like the best chemical possible in your body. It makes you feel euphoric, like you're in love, like you want to be close. So my suggestion is, try to hold eye contact with people for a little bit longer than you normally do, especially with someone that you hope maybe to have a sexual encounter with, or maybe your beloved that you've been with for a long time. For example, at the moment of penetration, hold your partner's eyes. And if you can, possibly, at the moment of orgasm, hold eye contact. I work with a lot of people who sort of close their eyes and lose themselves in their own ecstatic bliss. But what's happening is that you're dropping the contact with each other. Number 2, synchronized breathing. This is something most yogis know and something often taught in Tantra. So we all know that deep breathing helps to relax us. And we all know that deep breathing diffuses stress in our body and it relaxes tension. But when you synchronize your breath with another person, again, the brain fires up mirror neurons, you go into empathic resonance. And the cool thing about that is that you're feeling not only your own pleasure, but you're feeling the pleasure of your partner as well. Synchronized breathing, deep synchronized breaths, increases blood flow and circulation throughout the body. When you imagine breathing in and out of your genitals, it increases sensation there. For men, it can delay orgasm and ejaculation and make you last longer. For women, it can heighten sensation and actually quicken and intensify your orgasm. These are all good things, right? Number 3, this is what I call open the agenda. Most people go into a sexual or romantic encounter with an agenda. And sometimes that agenda is unconscious, like maybe you want to impress your partner, or maybe you want to feel loved through the encounter. Sometimes the agenda is just habitual, like to have an orgasm or to give an orgasm. And I remember during my own explorations, I used to sit across from every single date I had with this question in my mind: could he be the one? And I know a lot of women, I'm seeing a lot of heads nod, a lot of women have this thought as well. So instead of going into your encounter with your unmet needs controlling the experience, can you sit across from your partner and simply allow it to unfold? Sex gets hot and holy when we make love an improvisational art, when we're simply in empathic resonance with one another, when we're in emotional attunement with one another, and we're responding, giving and taking. It gets really hot. Number 4 is expression. Very important. I highly recommend to everybody to have the conversation that you need to have before you go into a sexual experience. Say what's on your mind. Clear that slate so that you can fully open on all of your channels with your partner. And during sex, if you want something different, let your partner know. If something feels amazing, let your partner know. Ladies, I recently did a survey on Facebook about what men really want in hot and holy sex. And the number one thing that they all want is your expression. They want to hear you. They want to hear your voice. They want to feel and hear your pleasure. Men, women need to feel cherished, safe, and adored in order to be sexually aroused. So I highly recommend you offer her your words of adoration and your sincerity before, during, and after a sexual encounter. Communication gets a lot easier, by the way, when you're already in empathic resonance. So if you have built already an emotional connection, you're safe and you're free to kind of get loud and get wild, right? Expression, very important. Number 5, put your devices away. In a world where we are increasingly glued to our screens, we must remember to look up and to see each other. I read a study recently that said, even when a cell phone is in sight, and even peripherally, that personal disclosures go down by at least 60%. One of my favorite tools I want to offer you around this is called the phone stack. So you and whomever you're with, if it's one person or maybe a group of people or even a family, stack your phones at the end of the table for a circumscribed period of time, or preferably even in another room where nobody can see the phones. And it might be just for an evening while you're together, and it might even just be for an hour over dinner. And watch how deep the conversation can go. If you're on a date, this is like foreplay. I mean, your conversation is leading up to the sexual or the intimate encounter. Hopefully, if all goes well, put your phone away. And finally, number 6, discernment. You might be surprised to know that this is actually the biggest key to hot and holy sex next to empathy. Make sure that whoever you're having sex with or any sexual exchange with, that you are 100% yes about it. Not a 50-50, not an 80%, but 100% full body yes to the experience. How many of you here have ever had a sexual encounter that you later came to regret? Kind of almost everybody, really, right? So sex becomes hot and holy when there's no part of you that is questioning the experience. Because look, in order to hold the secret in, whatever you're not saying, whatever you're withholding from your partner, and this could happen to married couples, this could happen on a one-night stand. Whatever you're not saying necessitates that the body contract and hold tension in order to keep that secret in. And it becomes very, very difficult, if not impossible, to create an emotional bond with somebody through the wall of that tension. So say what you need to say and make sure you're doing what you really want to do. Watch what happens to your sex. Throughout my field research of hot and holy sex, I realized that sexual science and sacred sexuality are really two roads that lead up to the same mountain. And what's at the top is a transcendental sense of oneness. Because isn't that really what we're after in sex and in everything? It's to remember our belonging, not only to God, but to each other. My own story has a happy ending. After 5 years of awkward Tantra classes and field research, I met a wonderful man, and I'm in the best relationship of my life. I realized that if I was to ask a partner to meet me in the depths of devotion, in the depths of erotic intimacy that I was really craving, that I had to be willing to go there myself. Hot and holy sex reminds us that really the most exalted ecstasy possible, the most erotic, juicy, exciting sex we can have is truly love. Thank you very much.